I'm Dane Rose, and in this video, we're going to explore some themes, some connecting points in the areas of sensitivity, trauma, and power dynamics, I guess would be a good way to say it. So the first thing to understand is that no human being, in fact, nothing, is completely inert. And we're all looking at relays of energy. A relationship is a relay, and a sustainable, healthy relationship is a relay of energy that strengthens the sustainable well-being of both patterns, of both identities. So if you have a friendship with someone and they send you energy and you are stronger, and ideally they enjoy sending you the energy, so they are stronger in the sending, then you give them back energy and you enjoy that and are stronger, and you are able to deliver the energy in a format that creates even more strength in them. So that's a highly sustainable, a highly intelligent relay of energy. But if we look more neutrally at the relay of energy, is all relays are interactive. So no one is completely immune. Now, people will spend energy to appear immune. Because one of the, when you're dealing with sociopaths or people in a sociopathic state, often what the goal is to generate a response. Meaning if you're trying to medicate powerlessness, which is a dis-ease, meaning nobody enjoys being powerless, but there is a tremendous perception of powerlessness that moves around, somewhat like a flu. It's contracted and transmitted. And then I feel powerless because you did this and I can't change that. And then I do this and you feel powerless because of that. And I really want things to go this way, but they don't because, somebody else did something. So one of the dis-eases is powerlessness. And at extreme levels of powerlessness, there's the risk of just giving up. It's at some point, it's called learned helplessness. If you will erratically traumatize and shock animals, and they learn basically that no matter what they do, they are going to be hurt, they will just lay down on the floor and do absolutely nothing. And that is a risk, meaning that is an intelligent coping strategy. If all expenditures of energy are proven ineffective in the reduction of pain, which is every being's goal, then what's the point, right? Why bother? And so you just lay down and basically wait to die. And that laying down, by the way, does not have to be a cessation of all movement. It may be the surrender to the system, to the cult, to the identity. I'm not happy. I'm never going to be happy. No matter what I do, I cannot be happy. So I guess I'll just get up and go to work and come home and numb out to the mediocrity of TV and fast food and do it again, because I'm just going to go through the motions. I'm going to live the routine, but I'll try and tune out as much as possible. I'll try and maybe create an alternative reality where I feel I have some agency, because no matter what I do, I don't seem to be able to create the love that I want or have the impact that I want on the people I care about or whatever it is. And so I'm just going to go through the motion. I'm going to lay down and die to creativity, die to dreams, die to innovation, die to effort. And I will just put in my time until I die, which feels like a relief, because then I don't have to put in my time and nobody's expecting anything of me. And so that's another form of dying, to just let go of all hope and all initiative. But we do that when particularly we are punished, we are traumatized for making any effort to make things better. Mom's sulking, and we say, well, hey, Mom, why are you sulking? And she says, shut up, and gives you a slap. So you tried to make things better, and you got slapped. And then you tried to leave the house because obviously you couldn't make it better. And Mom says, where are you going? You're leaving your mom and, to deal with all these misery alone? Go on, enjoy yourself so you feel better. You feel like you've done something wrong again. You get close and get out of my way. I'm busy, right? And so there's no way to win. And so you can just freeze. You can just go into waiting to be punished, waiting to be hit. There's no way out. So we can induce these states in animals very reliably and predictably. A dog will starve themselves to death if their nose is flicked repeatedly and they're told, don't eat this food. Every time they go near the food, that they get that trauma by a larger force. A dog will literally, 3 feet away from food, starve to death because the shock of and the upset of disappointing the owner, the provider, the deity, right? That's what parents are. That's what government is. An authority figure that is seen as the provider of need can traumatize someone in a dependent state into willingly dying rather than disobeying the authority figure. And people do that every single day. They kill themselves slowly with smoking rather than telling the truth. They kill themselves with gambling and drinking rather than face certain areas that they just can't win. They overdose on drugs. They drive too fast. They just refuse to move. They shut down in depression. They commit suicide because there's no way to win without dealing with an authority figure. Now, one of the more important things to understand when there is a relay of energy is the law of mass. So there is a relay of energy between a pinball and a bowling ball. So here's the bowling ball, the little one is the pinball. Now, whenever those two collide, the pinball goes flying, the bowling ball continues in its original trajectory. The bowling ball absorbs the energy of the pinball and continues and gives back energy. The pinball bounces off. Now, the bowling ball does slow down momentum. I mean, if you put 1,000 pinballs all shooting at the bowling ball might stop entirely or it slow down 80%. But just one pinball and a bowling ball going at equal speeds. The bowling ball is maybe 100 times heavier, 100 times bigger. And so the pinball may slow the bowling ball down imperceptibly, 1%. The bowling ball is slowed down 1%. The pinball is completely stopped and then goes flying in the opposite direction, bouncing, the energy absorbing and then sending back off of the bowling ball. Now, if we look at people, if we look at this same dynamic, an infant is 1/10 the size and weight of a large grown human. So when the infant collides, tottering on their feet, etc., and the human doesn't move, the infant experiences more shock as it runs into that than the larger object. If the larger object gives a slap to a 2-year-old, that can be the equivalent of a 2-ton elephant knocking you flying today with one of its feet or a trunk, ripping you up and throwing you into the air. An elephant can uproot trees. An elephant's got strength. Now, if you find yourself hurled into a tree or off a cliff by an elephant, it's similar in proportion to a newly born infant being violated by the giant, by a human being. It's a question of scale. So the smaller the object in relationship to a larger object, one person that is attacked by their entire government. So this is a huge issue in cases of abuses of power. The Bidens didn't like the fact that a journalist got hold, legally, but got hold of their daughter's diary. And so they sent the entire FBI, first on Microsoft. We want all the email records of this journalist. And Microsoft caved. Microsoft doesn't want the US government and the FBI attacking it, bullying it, because the US government can do a lot of damage to Microsoft. And there's an understanding of the reptilian brain that is present in every human being, the fear defense brain that is present in every human being. And when you give that brain, that reptilian brain, to a president who can personally authorize a war, can authorize the Justice Department, can call someone angrily and say, "Get the fuck moving. I don't want to hear about protocol. I don't want to hear about the First Amendment. I want this done now." When a young and new employee is commanded by, or coerced, they come into an office and 20 attorneys, and the president of the company, and the person that brought them into the company, are all gathered around the table, and they all want one thing. You need to sign a non-disclosure agreement now. For the benefit of this company, you do not want us as your enemies. Sign this now. We'll give you $150,000. Give you a little bonus. Do it. How many hundreds of millions of dollars are riding, are back behind that? The whole investor community that doesn't want to lose money with a scandal is all being directed to one person. That's the pinball. And the law of mass dictates that when two energies collide, the small energy goes flying, and the large energy continues on its trajectory. Now, that flying, the person that walked into the meeting may have walked in clear that they were going to do the right thing, clear that their identity, their belief system, their values were about truth, were about transparency, were about doing the right thing. And the right thing is to tell the story of what went on in the company. But that identity, that pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is very small. And when that is arrayed, when that is met by 20 attorneys, each charging $400 to $700 an hour, when $200,000 an hour is leveraged against someone that won't make that amount of money in 5 years, it's a force. We value money in a cult that places money before human beings. If you have $100,000, you will be housed. If you have $5, you will be homeless, you will be shamed, and 26 years will be cut off from your life. You will die 26 years sooner because you don't have this substance, this symbol that is valued more than human beings. And there's a lot of it. And that money, that symbol of life, wants you to do this. Isn't going to accept truth, ideals, personal preference, family history as a qualifying argument. You've got to save this company from the corruption within the company. Now, we're not going to solve the corruption. That's hard. We're going to solve the elucidation of the corruption. We're going to silence the messenger. That's easy. For $300,000 a time, we can silence you and you and you and you and you, and the corruption can continue because that could take hundreds of millions of dollars. That could require a major reshuffling. That could lose $1.5 billion in shareholder value. Becomes apparent that for the last 10 years, this pattern has been going on, that all the senior people are involved in the cover-up, and the street loses confidence in the enterprise's ability to continue its growth if that management team is retired. And suddenly the company is worth half what it was yesterday before the truth was known. And everyone in the room wants to get you to change your identity, your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and go in the opposite direction that you want to go, so that the status quo can be maintained, that all these 20 people can go home and feel safer, that they are not going to meet the fury of the global media, which is a bigger energy than them, of their entire customer base. See, those energies are big and threaten the company. The company is big and threatens the identity of its employee. All energy forms are in the business of surviving with as little energy expended in the process. Conservation of energy is a rule of survival. And if you can be shut up for $300,000 rather than spend $1.5 billion actually solving the problem, getting to the heart of the issue and rebuilding trust, then that energy structure of the entire organization is going to be leveraged to silence one person. That is a big energy to face, because all energy is interactive. All exchanges are inactive. None are inert. There's no person that just takes tons and tons and tons of energy and does absolutely nothing with it and isn't changed by it. People's patterns and identities are strengthened or weakened by each interaction. Every interaction changes us. 0.1%, 59%, 380%. It depends on the nature of the interaction. Now, there is truth and validity in every perspective. Now, this is different, and it's an important distinction to make, then there is equal competency in every perspective, in every individual. So here's a good way to see this. So we have a planet, and around this planet, we have billions of individuals. And each of these individuals sees a different part of the whole and contributes value and perspective. They see a different part. If you look at down here in Alaska, and you ask, what's going on? And the people in Alaska will say, it's dark here. And then you go to Antarctica and you say, what's going on? And they say, it's light here. You don't want one of those perspectives to win. What you want is synthesis. You want depth perception. Now, a simple brain, the conservation of energy, the first default is either or. Which is it? Is it dark or is it light? Well, the Arctic folks say it's dark. The Antarctic folks say it's light. Well, if you put that to a vote, and this is unfortunate, this is what happens a lot of the time, there's more people in the Arctic than there is in the Antarctic. And so if you just say, let's just democratically resolve this. It's dark, it's light, which is it? It's either or. So we're going to take a vote. And there's 200,000 people in the Arctic, and there's only 1,000 in the Antarctic. And all of the Antarctics, you know, they all say it's dark. And everyone in the, whichever way it was, it's going to be dark in one half of the Earth at the same time it's very light in the other. Because the Earth is a complex ecology. It's going to be happy in one part of the psyche at the same time it's sad in another. One person and one group is going to be winning a war, an argument, while another person is going to be losing a war and an argument. And so in a complex system, in a system of a species, of an ecology, of a planet, you want diversity of perspective because that is diversity of data, because that gives you a more complex view of what's actually going on. But in simplistic thinking, you reduce it down to the majority. You know, 200,000 people say it's light, 1,000 people say it's dark. We're going with the majority. It's light right now. And what's lost in that is the dimensionality and the complexity of life. It's reduced down to a point where what I can see through my limited observing and measuring devices is all there is. And this is not as useful at succeeding as understanding the model in which the Earth and the Sun and various planetary bodies are in a circular relationship, and that there's enough room for some people to be sad and some people to be happy at the same time. Through perceiving things from a different angle, there's enough room for some people to be in 30 below zero temperatures and other people to be scalding in the Sahara Desert. There's enough room for that in a complete and a complex picture of reality. And so you want diversity of perspectives, but there is a strong conservation of energy drive, which means I just want to see it my way. I don't want to see the other point of view. Meaning I don't want to have to think about the fact that the Earth is going around the sun and that the very time when I'm sleeping is the time when other people are waking up, and that that's interesting and that that means things and da-da-da. I don't want to have to think about all that. When it's dark, people should be not working. Why are you awake in Australia? Just do it my way. There's a conservation of energy around that. And so while we have grown in certain areas geographically, for example, we have not grown in areas around which political system is better. Well, it varies based on what's going on. If you're trying to get out of the Great Depression, nationalizing certain enterprises and hiring people and doing great public works, more socialist type things, could have some benefits. And if you're dealing with a glut of corruption and nepotism and all that, bringing in free market competition could have some real benefit, right? Depends on the context. And it depends on the complexity and competency of the applicator. So all of this is around the equation that diversity of perspective is a strength, as long as there aren't lies. But even understanding that in this area, most people are lying in this area is a useful bit of data, because people lie out of fear. It takes effort to lie. To conceal something requires an effort, an energy expenditure. So the only time you lie is when you're afraid of a consequence of being seen. The only time you lie is when you're around sociopaths. Because an empath does not hurt you after seeing you. An empath does not hurt you because you reveal yourself. A sociopath will. And so if you're going to the effort to conceal yourself, it is because you are being hunted. And you know it. And it still consumes less energy to hide than it does to be devoured, to recover from the attack. Economic, social, religious, physical, emotional, whatever. However, that's the diversity of perspective. In terms of responding to that perspective, and everyone has an equally valuable, sincere perspective. If you listen to everyone and how they're seeing things, it will give you a more clear picture of reality than if you listen to one person, or two people, or three people. So you want diversity of perspective. You don't want a bullying dynamic where the Arctic's version of reality, that it's light out, buries the Antarctic version of reality where it's dark, simply because there are more people in the Arctic. You want an equal balance of power when it comes to perspective. Because even if 1,000 people are living in a desert and there's one oasis in the center of the desert, and one person is living in the oasis, and you do a survey and you say, is there a drought on? And 999 people say yes, not enough water. And one person says, no, I've got all the water I ever need, because they're in the oasis. To discount that one, the minority, simply because there isn't room for the complexity of diversity, is sheer stupidity. If their data is is averaged out of the mix so that you have a nice clean graph of we're all in agreement, you miss the chance to find the oasis. The only person who knows about the oasis is the one. You delete them, you've deleted the single most important data of the whole set. Where is the oasis? How do we get there? How do we find the land of plenty? Now, that's not a good outcome. So you want to move towards a balance, a framework where those with the most money, those with the biggest numbers do not dominate the perspective, the data set of the whole. On the other hand, if we look at competency, and we look at, okay, we've accepted that there is an oasis and only one person is living in it, and we all want an oasis, so we want to locate the oasis, and what we want to do is expand the oasis. There isn't quite enough room in the oasis for everyone to move to the oasis. We want to learn how to create more oasis. We want to tap into the aquifer of the oasis. We want to drill down and we want to make oases. We want to take this little microecology and we want to redesign it. We want to recreate it because we're all in a desert. So it seems like the oasis has a valley. And so who has the competency to reshape and make valleys in the desert? Well, that's a bulldozer operator. That's people with buckets, whatever. And there's going to be one or two people in the group that know how to do that more than everyone else. You don't share bulldozing operation equally. You know, let's have this little old lady who doesn't know how to see clearly. Let's have her drive the bulldozer equally and have her say in that. See, competency is not created equal. Perspective. The more diverse the perspectives that are honest, the better off the data set. The more intelligent the response can be if you're intelligent, right? If you're not intelligent, you can have the best data set around. You don't know anything good to do with it. But if you're intelligent, now you can respond. But then now that you're in the response phase, so the perspective, the data gathering is democratic. The response is autocratic. The democracy of an intelligent group will say, you've got 30 years of bulldozing experience. We're going to do the bulldozing your way. So an informed democracy will allocate and delegate based on competence, which is not equal. Now, if you have fools, they might say, well, let's break it up equally. Everyone should have a chance to drive the bulldozer. You know, Billy feels left out here. He wants to drive the bulldozer. He's 10 years old. He doesn't know how to drive anything. He's not at all interested in sculpting an oasis. He wants to drive a big, powerful machine. Why should Billy? This is a democracy, after all. Why shouldn't Billy get his chance on the bulldozer, right? So a group of fools will say, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because we're all equal. And, why should one person be excluded? And let's have a meeting about that, right? More informed people, more competent people will allocate the response to data in specialized areas to the people with the highest competency. You know what? I think I'm going to have my brain surgery done by a brain surgeon, not by Billy, because the same principle is true. Now, none of us want idiots killing our parents or our lovers or our dogs or ourselves because everyone wants an equal shot at the medicine. But we might, do this kind of thing when it, if we don't understand what we don't understand, then it might seem to make sense. And this is one of the areas that is a big tension point in, with the focus on gender equality and racial equality and economic equality, et cetera, is, statistically speaking, the reason that the Olympics has a separate category for women and men is that if men were allowed to compete in the female Olympics, men would win almost every single gold medal, and not a single woman would get a single gold medal in many categories. Now, curling, darts, there's many areas where you're not looking at the optimal aim and exertion in the way that you would be in boxing. It's with the gender flipping that's going on right now, where, you can get a sex operation and a man can now be called a woman. A man can now beat up. If a man was a heavyweight male boxer, a male can now enter the woman's boxing arena and can beat up every woman. Makes sense. It's the law of mass. The man is bigger, the man is taller, the man has slightly different built arms, but also a predisposition towards focused strategy and dissociation from empathy, all of which have benefits statistically in a boxing ring, right? And so that's why we separate the male Olympics from the female Olympics, right? Is we want women to have an equal playing field with women's bodies. Now, if you take another area, not the Olympics, but you take entrepreneurship, there's good data in that similarly educated women as CEOs of companies do a better job at avoiding one of the chauvinistic pitfalls that men fall into, which is that bigger is always better. So a woman is a little bit less likely to try and become the biggest telecom giant in the world. Like, why? Bigger is not always better. Why should we clash two different cultures? Why should we overpay the share price? Why should we take such a big risk when we could become the best in a given niche? Who cares about being bigger? So there's areas where the female competency is statistically higher, and nursing is another. But oil rigs isn't one of them. Oil production doesn't go up when you take off all the brawny men on the oil rig crew dealing with welding equipment and put women in there. The production doesn't go up. And women don't want the jobs. They could apply for the jobs. And in a military situation, if you took all the men out and required women to run the military, you're putting bodies that are statistically weaker in a combat arena. Now that flips when you go into robotics, right? Or into some other area, or into strategy or diplomacy. But if it's just we're gonna put a male army against a female army, and they're all gonna do sword play and blow each other up, statistically speaking, the men are going to win. So it's not a very good allocation of competency. So an intelligent group doesn't want everyone to have a good, an equal right to press the nuclear button, everyone to do a stint on the oil wells, everyone to be a math teacher part-time, divide it all up equally. Let's have everyone be an equal math teacher. No, an intelligent group measures the competency for a given area and then puts much more weight on the people who have the most competency. This is a decision-making protocol that Ray Dalio worked out with Bridgewater Investing and with an app to measure competency in different areas. And the person with the most competency in a given area has most of the weight of that vote, because that's what an intelligent group of people does. An intelligent group of people wants to have more well-being with less cost, right? A group of fools may say, well, we don't really care or have the ability to evaluate what is the benefit and we just want everything to be equal. We want people to feel good. And we've told people that they shouldn't feel good unless they're treated equally. And that equality means we all spend 10 minutes a day on the oil wheel. We all do this. We all do that. And we should all be paid the same amount, regardless of our competency, regardless of the rarity of the competency. Now, one of the things that happens with the free market, on that little side note, is that it takes a lot of education, a lot of risk, a lot of insurance, a lot of skill to become the world's top brain surgeon. Now, if there is a need for that, and there are few brain surgeons, the price is going to go up. Now, if the price reaches a certain point, people are going to start training to be brain surgeons. Now, maybe when brain surgeons make $100,000 a year, I don't want to go to 8 years of training and this and that, and then pay $100,000 a year in insurance just to make $100,000 and break even. It's not enough, right? But brain surgeons go to $200,000, then $300,000, then $500,000, then $700,000. And you realize you're going to have to spend $300,000 learning it in 8 years and deal with stress. And then you're going to deal with the fact that you're going to know you might have saved someone, but you were learning and you killed them. That's no fun. Who wants to deal with that? I don't. But a brain surgeon has to deal with it. Or their first kill, they just stop everything, right? How do you get good at something without practice? There's no way around it. Every brain surgeon who's been working for 10 years will tell you they were not as good when they began. Well, who wants to be the one knowing that, now that they learned this and this little technique that isn't in the textbook, they could have saved 3 people. Who wants to deal with that and take that to confessional? Well, a brain surgeon has to. And not a lot of other people can understand what that feels like because they're not brain surgeons. Because they don't have to live with that. So what's going to drive more people into brain surgery so that the cost comes down? The salary, that reward, that prestige, that respect. So that's free market dynamics. Now, What that means is that the people who take the highest risks in innovation and work the hardest and invest the most get the highest payoff. And if other people look at that and say, I want some of that, then they join the pack and they increase the supply of that service and the price comes down. But what remains expensive is that which could not be competed for easily, right? And so free market economic tension and competition is always letting everyone know this is the area of our cult, of our culture, that is in high demand with low supply. Really, really expensive things where people get paid very highly. The message is clear. A lot of people want this service, and there's very little service providers around. Very few service, so we have to pay a lot. Until people notice that and say, well, I'm going to become a brain surgeon. I'm going to do this. And as they do that, the supply increases, the cost comes down, and then not a lot of people say, I'm not going to spend 8 years studying to do that and get $100,000 in insurance so I can make $50,000 a year. And so it regulates out. And so to conclude that thought, you want highly competent people making the decisions and having the most impact, which is a minority. The most exceptional people, the most competent people, the most knowledgeable people in a given area are always a minority. And whoever has that competence, an intelligent group will delegate that job to them. Whoever has that competence. You know, an environmental group may hate Walmart for all the consumerism that results from reducing prices. It is a simple fact that if things are cheaper, people will buy more of them, and then will waste more of them, and then there will be more ecological damage because of lower prices. And so Walmart has lowered prices more than almost any other entity, other than now they're supplanted by, Amazon and Alibaba and these things. So, but these big distributors lower costs, increase consumption, increase ecological imbalance. And so there's resentment in ecological circles towards Walmart or Amazon, etc. However, Walmart, and perhaps soon Amazon, but at one point Walmart could move a pound of goods around the world cheaper, more efficiently, and more reliably than any other entity on the planet. If you gave Walmart's job to the US military, they would get it done for 1,000 times more money than Walmart would take to get it done. 1,000 times. Because Walmart wasn't hired. But the competency that Walmart has of efficient transportation and organization, shipping, that competency is independent of its objective, meaning an intelligent ecologist would ask Walmart to produce 1 trillion trees and ship them around the globe cheaper than any other entity on the planet, and provide free trees on condition that people plant them. Now, Walmart would have that system up and running in a flash. 1 trillion trees. 1 trillion trees planted could single-handedly offset all carbon emissions that we're producing as human beings over a 100-year period. 2 trillion trees. This is not a lot of money. Inefficient companies can see a tree planted and moved around for $1. But what if Walmart was given the job? What if Walmart were given $1 trillion by the world's global governments and by donations to plant and distribute $3 to $5 trillion trees for 20 cents each? And rather than plant them with Walmart employees, all the ecological do-gooders around the world could go to Walmart and get free trees where they would put a deposit down of 25 cents a tree or $1 a tree. They'd get a QR code, and they would send a photo of each tree planted in a unique thing so that Walmart's digital software would analyze every photo and make sure it was unique. And then that price would be deleted once someone planted the tree and sent a photo, and the AI would verify that that was a unique background on that tree of all the backgrounds sent. The bits of bark were arranged in this pattern rather than this pattern, right? We'd just do a pattern analysis and make sure there was a unique background and make the tree free. So that human beings, in a matter of 1 to 3 years, could plant free trees in their garden, on their hillside, in their parks. The Park Service could use them, and 5 trillion trees planted that were selected by ecologists and Walmart. Walmart would distribute the varieties to each store that would grow the most drought tolerant and consume the most carbon. And then Walmart would promote tree planting with the same adrenaline and dopamine addiction that it tries to get you to buy Snickers. 5 trillion trees planted. $1 trillion. Walmart could get enough free trees all around the world in all of its locations. And anyone who wanted to could pull up a pickup and get 1,000 trees at a time. Go out and do a work party, and done, done, done. 5 trillion trees planted. Global emissions offset. But in order to think that way, you can't demonize a person or a company. You have to look at their competency. And you have to see how that competency can help be a medicinal force. When General Patton took authority over occupied Germany in Second World War, he was intelligent enough to delegate the job of getting firewood and food to the German people to the Nazi power structure. In doing so, he committed a political sin to acknowledge relationships and value of the Nazi Party. But he got the job done. Because if you are so organized that you're willing to commit suicide, that you're willing to torture because you were told by an authority to do so, if you're able to hunt down a Jew 300 miles away and get them to a gas chamber for mass murder, that's a lot of work. How much skill does it take to deliver firewood to people you care about? You see, that's dissociating the role of an authoritarian member of an authoritarian cult and the competency to get things done strategically, efficiently, and do reports. Because to go to war with the entire world twice and come close to winning has some pretty good organizational competencies enclosed there, high ambition competencies. The sociopathic nature of the endeavor is independent of the competency. If we don't want to see a complex version of reality, if we don't want to succeed, all we want to see is a demon. And we can do the exact same mistake that Hitler did. I mean, Hitler may have been a great organizer, a great group event host. I can't get 10 million people to show up at my events. I'm lucky if I get 10 people to show up for my events. Hitler, 10 million. So if I want to learn about event hosting, I could take a book, I could learn things from Hitler. Now, I can also learn from Hitler not to judge Hitler by race and by name. Hitler destroyed the Jews because it's a simple way of thinking. It's easy, right? It's incredibly easy to just lump a whole group of people and say they're all bad or they're all good or they're all whatever. That's conservation of energy. So that's what Hitler did. He conserved energy by blaming one group of people for the entire, everything wrong in the world. And then he dedicated himself to solving one problem, the final problem. In other words, in Hitler's delusions, when he was done with getting rid of the one problem, everyone was going to live happily ever after. The only trouble is there are a billion very small problems, and they're created within all groups of people. There isn't a group of people that has all the problems and that came out of a vacuum. Even the groups of people that have all the problems, right? If you look at the history of the First World War to the Second World War, I'm reading the biography of Winston Churchill right now. It's a 30-hour audiobook listen per book. There's 3 of them, so it's 90 hours of history through Churchill's biographer. And Churchill was highly against the sociopathic treatment of Germans after the First World War, meaning Germans were hated so much after the First World War that they were made to feel small, humiliated, crippled, completely incompetent. They were put through enormous suffering as revenge, as retaliation for going to war with the world. And Churchill was against this. He thought that there should be a forgiveness of the German people who were not the Kaiser, and that would set the stage for a cooperative feeling rather than hatred and powerlessness, because all powerless and pain breeds hate. And the world bred hate within Germany. And Hitler was fueled by that hate. It's not actually Hitler. It is the combination of the hate created by the world in the German people and the hate created by the world in Hitler. Hitler was a prisoner of war, humiliated, really hurt by what happened to Germany. It's those hates and hurts combined with the ineptitude and enablement of world governments as Hitler rose to power, combined with betrayals of loyalties and fear, Chamberlain's appeasement protocol. All of that led to the Second World War. Hitler was just one raving guy who didn't feel very well. Without the entire world's participation in an educational program of what happens when you breed hate in an entire country. What happens? And then you try to appease the extremist views that emerge out of shame and deprivation. So it wasn't, but that's the attitude, meaning if you're a Hitler, if you haven't learned from Hitler, you are a Hitler in that arena, you just say that all Nazis are evil and should be exterminated in the gas chambers because they exterminated all Jews. So then once you've exterminated all the Nazis, then the next group of people will come and say, well, look at you killing all those Nazis. They killed 6 million Jews. Now you killed 12 million Nazis. And so we've got to kill all of you for being so heinous, for the crime against humanity. Look at how many millions of people, right? Because we're not actually learning from Hitler that if he had used all that brilliant organizing ability, setting an entire country back on its economic feet and doing all kinds of things and so much pioneering energy, if he had done that with a more informed perspective, the whole world could have been a better place. But he came into it with the world as the enemy because of what the world had done to his Germany, how he felt imprisoned and humiliated after the First World War. So his number one goal was to not feel that way, was to make the world feel the way that he felt, watching that happen to Germany. And that's just normal parts of psychology. And so what we also might learn from something like that is, you know what? Maybe we should learn a few hours of psychology. Maybe psychology is a more relevant subject to the world today than algebra. Nothing wrong with algebra. It's just, have you ever used it a day in your life? And what about psychology? What about parenting? Adolf's parents didn't get any great stars. What about trauma recovery? Right? What if there was a traumatic recovery institute and Hitler had gone to that after coming out of prison, was able to work out his helplessness, his grief, his vision, and make a contribution to his country, other than going to war with the world again and losing again. So, these are tangents. But if we come back to the central piece here, it's also worth noting that that's a matter of perspective. The tangents in this case are probably a lot more meaningful to all of us to learn from. If one person changed the protocol, because we have a protocol of passively watching and dissociating from the world with media. We watch someone get killed in the news, and then we say, tusk, tusk, and then we eat our dinner. We don't volunteer $1 to the person or the family who died. We don't go over and help. We don't write to the traffic board and suggest a new patent. We eat. Well, what if one person changed the protocol here and said, I'm going to enlist Walmart to plant 5 billion trees to grow and distribute 5 billion trees for 20 cents each. And I'm going to start raising $1 trillion from world governments to offset the entire carbon footprint of the planet. What, actually not eat after this? So these are the tangents of where we got started, but this is also the feminine arc of relationship. You see, the masculine arc of relationship is get to the point. So it's chauvinistic. There has to be one point, and we have to get there as soon as possible, says the chauvinist. We're not getting there as soon as possible. We're spending more time on the not there than there, and we're getting there in a very circuitous route. But along the way, we're covering more patterns of more relevance to all of our well-being than the original point that we could have just gotten to in 5 minutes and made this interaction incredibly boring. Here's the 5-minute thing. Every relationship is a relay of energy. One body, one pattern of energy will always affect the other pattern slightly more than the other pattern will affect them, or greatly more. So if a car drives full speed into a cliff, the cliff has a few dings in it. The car is totaled. If an individual crashes into the authoritarian state of their government, call it whatever you want, the life of the individual is crumpled, is traumatized, and the system, the protocol, the structure of the cult stays largely unchanged. The odd hunger strike, setting oneself on fire to protest the Vietnam War, it may get headlines, but did the bombs fall any less frequently on the subsequent week? You see, an individual can be incinerated, can dissolve their entire pattern and not change the status quo that is 10,000 times bigger than them, that would take 10,000 self-immolations to actually have enough of an impact to, maybe if 10,000 students a week set themselves on fire, and the rate continued until we stopped bombing Vietnam, we might actually care enough about the grief and inhumanity of bombing an innocent country indirectly. We might care about the hatred directed at the older generation from the young enough to stop. Let's at least do a ceasefire, and let's have a ceasefire, and no more of our children burning themselves alive for public news consumption, and we'll stop the bombing. And for every week we stop the bombing of women and children in other countries, we won't have to look at our own children committing suicide. But how many would it take before we were actually willing to listen? We're not going to be intimidated by our children. We have a right to burn women and children alive in other countries, and we're going to keep doing it for our own security. Well, that argument does wear a little thin when the next generation is protesting with their own lives. But one protest falls on deaf ears. So the laws, the mathematical laws that are affecting this are mass. and sensitivity or reactivity. So if I have if I have one bowling ball, and these are actually not drawn as small as pinballs, so you can see them. But let's say these are rocks. The bowling ball is running here, and we throw 10 rocks, 1/10 the size of the bowling ball, and we hit the bowling ball head on. Well, the bowling ball probably stops. You've got now a relationship of equality. You've now got a basis of not just one thing rolling over the other thing. You've got something going on there. A lot of the good stuff, a lot of the evolution, or a lot of the thoughtfulness that is involved with human evolution takes place when two people sit there for a few days. But the machinery of the daily routine, the machinery of the cult, the standard pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being precludes this stopping. So one of the things that can happen when you amass two forces of equal size is a pause, and a more intricate dialogue, a more creative process can emerge. Because if you have two bowling balls of exactly the same size and equal speed going against, and they hit each other, they both stop and go nowhere. If they could be repurposed to both be aimed off at a goal in the distance, or one goes and then the other one comes and knocks them further along the goal, it's a lot more interesting than a standstill, than a stalemate. But the other factor that I wanted to talk about is sensitivity. When you have two grown people, and the worst pain of person B is the loss of their daughter in a car accident. That's the worst pain in their life. And they make the pain worse every time they think that they were a bad parent. And this other person has never been in a car accident, has never lost a child. But they know how to provoke this parent with insinuations of incompetent and sociopathic parenting. They know how to say, well, you know, if you weren't such a dunce and so stubborn, your daughter would still be alive. So they can say that, and they can have a reaction on this person that is 1,000 times bigger than the reaction that saying that same thing has on them. And the other person can say the same thing back. Well, if you weren't such a dunce, maybe your child would still be alive, and it has 1,000 times less impact. So that's cultivated sensitivity. That's specialized sensitivity. And it creates an imbalance of power. An imbalance of impact is an imbalance of power. Power and impact overlap in a number of ways. Because if I can snap my fingers and say to 1,000 people, go do this, this, and this, and they all do it, and 1,000 people can snap their finger at me and say, do this, and I say, no, I'm the boss. There's an imbalance of power, right? Now, imbalances of power are toxic when they are used to repress minority data. Going back to why I went into that whole thing with the planet and all that, is concentrated power can just say, as far as I'm concerned, it is not light in the Arctic. And I'm using my superior math. I'm the owner of the company. I'm the funder of the research. We're just going to delete that whole data set and simplify it to something that I like, that makes me feel comfortable, that agrees with my perspective, so I don't have to think. you have a big problem there. But if I digest all of the data from all of the different minorities and majorities around the world, and I'm the most competent person, and I use that data empathically to better the planet, the species, the family, etc., well, that is that's a good concentration of power. So we want to increase the effectiveness of data gathering from all different sources to have a higher resolution image of reality. Then we understand the law of mass, which is physical mass. But then when we're dealing psychologically, there's also a law of mass. And if you have something on your mind, something that you can say that is 10 times more painful to me than it is to you, then we're back in the situation with the pinball. Then I'm going to avoid you. Then I'm going to let you have your own way so that you don't hurt me with that sledgehammer. Or I'm going to be weakened and worn down fighting you. You have a neighbor that wants to bully another neighbor. And they just say and do things that are so upsetting to the other person that they move house. And then the other neighbor does exactly what they want, right? Because while the house was on the market, there was no one to protest and they just did it, right? So you have psychological laws of mass. Trauma trigger points are part of what's being addressed healthily in these issues. If I have an unresolved trauma that a blonde person raped me when I was 6 years old, and I'm in a traumatically illiterate cult, and so nobody knows how to help me, and I don't know how to help myself. I just know I feel terrified and I feel 6 years old whenever there's a blonde man with this kind of hair in my face. And you happen to be a blonde man telling me to do this and this and this, and I can't deal with it. I become 6 years old. And so I do what I don't want to do. I do what I know to be crazy because I can't face the trauma alone in a traumatically illiterate cult. Well, now we have another imbalance, and it's an invisible imbalance because we've decided to be traumatically illiterate. We don't ask and we don't tell, and so it's an invisible bowling ball and pinball collision. But there's one other form of imbalance that kind of ties into this, and it's called sensitivity. It's particularly related to broad spectrum sensitivity at a brain level, at a biological level, referencing work by Dr. Elaine Aron and others on highly sensitive people, highly reactive people. Because a highly sociopathic person of equal size and money and all that, in contest, in tension, in a relay of energy, in an interaction that says, it's a great day, isn't it? The other person says, no, it's not a great day. They're not affected. That's the whole nature of dissociation. Whatever. Done, right? But if you are in a more reactive or more sensitive state, if you respond, you may be in a great state and somebody says, no, it's a miserable day. And then you spend the rest of the 6 hours of the day wondering what went on in that person's life and how that probably, and now that you mention, And, you know, their accent, they're Jewish. I wonder if they lost their parents and grandparents in the Holocaust and stuff like that. And everyone's moving on, and what did I say? I had a great day, right? So as a strongly sensitive, empathic person, every little thing about other people affects you 10 times more than it affects them. So you don't affect them. To them, you're a pinball. But to you, they are a bowling ball. And this has to do with responsiveness, which correlates with empathy, which also correlates with conscientiousness, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to understand, wanting to empathize. This makes us tremendously malleable. I was going to go for a walk, but you said you're feeling terrible. Maybe I should cancel my whole walk. My whole trajectory changes. My whole identity changes because of you. Now, this can create a highly imbalanced relationship as well, where the sensitive person cares more for the insensitive person than the insensitive person cares for themselves. And so there's this dynamic of a pinball being hit from bowling ball to bowling ball to bowling ball to bowling ball and scattering. Because they are more empathic, they are more responsive, they are more sensitive. They are more attuned to other people than other people are attuned to them. And it's important, as we wrap this up, to conclude with an awareness that's very important. So this bowling ball is going here. This pinball is going there. And this pinball is about to be sent flying. That's the law of mass. It's not the law of intelligence. It's not the law of morality. It's not the law of good or bad. It's just the law of mass. When two patterns of energies collide, the smaller one goes flying, the larger one continues on its original trajectory. Here's the important thing to understand. The bowling ball may be heading over a cliff. The pinball may be heading to safety. You know, there may be a terrific future waiting off in this direction that the bowling ball actually wants, but is too dumb to realize that it's off course. It doesn't matter. The only way that you get a bowling ball, and in this analogy, a bowling ball is a group of people, a power structure, a cult, a family system. The only way you get the bowling ball to change course is by a tremendous amount of education that is, in a traumatically illiterate cult, done in opposition to the terror and fear of change. So there's a terror and fear of change. And that fear of change is conflated with the fear of death. So if you're very skillful and expend energy, you can educate the bowling ball, the group, that there is a superior direction, a superior pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And they may even agree with you. That makes sense. But I'm not going to do it because I'm afraid to die. Because I'm afraid of the unknown, because I'm afraid of taking risks, and because I'm not 100% certain that there's a cliff over the edge here. After all, my grandparents behaved like this, my parents behaved like this, and I've been behaving like this for a very long time. So they haven't gone off a cliff. And so I'm just going to keep going the way that I've always gone until I find myself in free fall. But by that time, the pinball has already been scattered. You know, in the Second World War, 4 separate individuals came to Stalin who had made a pact with Hitler, a non-aggression pact. And Stalin absolutely trusted Hitler, who had just lied to every single country he'd formed a pact with. And so every time anyone warned Stalin about Hitler's betrayal, he tuned them out. Not only that, some people refused to tell Stalin the message because they already knew that Stalin would treat them personally with disgust, with disdain, with impatience, and they didn't want to receive that treatment. And so Stalin was in complete and utter shock, and more than 1 million Russian men, women, and children died because the pinball, the 4 individuals who had such low rank within the power structure, because the pinball could not get through and influence the bowling ball. And so the bowling ball went off over a cliff. More than 1 million Russian lives were lost because the pinball could not influence the bowling ball. So the minority, a minority, is always more intelligent than the majority. A distinct minority, and this is important because there's also a distinct minority that is less intelligent than the majority. In the bell curve of excellence and adaptation, there are 2 distinct minorities, the Luddites and the cutting edge of any technology. And the majority is in the middle. There's always a distinct minority of pinball that is in direct opposition with the group, with the consensus, with the cult, with the bowling ball. And 99% of the time, the pinball lacks the skill to reveal the data set, because when you're stupid, you're too dumb to know you're stupid. This is the problem of all genius. The majority is not a genius. If you cannot grasp the equation, you cannot grasp that you cannot grasp the equation because you cannot see clearly enough to see that you're blind. And so the majority insists day after day, decade after decade, century after century, in wasting 90% of its time, money, and natural resources to cause vast amounts of unnecessary suffering to itself, its neighbors, and its underlying ecology. And tunes out the minorities on both sides, the Luddites and the bleeding edge of genius, to conserve energy, because it takes no energy to avoid thought. You don't have to think at all. You know, watching a cat video is so much easier than this video. It's a conservation of energy. So, specialized sensitivities objective laws of mass. Someone's driving a truck, you're driving a Mini. It's no mystery which one is going to be thrown aside. Political clashes. You have 5% of the vote, they have 95% of the vote. How many political parties in the world willingly go out of their way to listen to the 5% that they don't need to get their own agendas rammed through the power structure? Almost none. But in many, many, many cases, if not all cases, a distinct minority, a pinball, relatively speaking, of people, has a technology, a perspective, an identity, a pattern of energy that is 1,000% more efficient at creating sustainable well-being than the status quo. And the status quo is dishonoring itself and that minority by using the law of mass to go over it. The most intelligent majority, the most intelligent power structure, the most intelligent bowling ball is always looking at the most important question. Which group of people, which entity, which company smaller than me is 10 times more intelligent than me? Because the Pareto principle guarantees that it is the case. If you're $1 billion company, it is an absolute guarantee that either within your ranks or outside of it, there is a minority of dissenting voices that have an idea, a perspective that is 1,000% superior to your own, to the status quo. And if you use superior mass to crush, to send that pinball flying, you are destroying the evolutionary path that you are on. You will meet a dead end. You will be consumed by an energy that bows to intelligence. Because everything does. Life's got time. 1 trillion years from now, every stupidity perpetuated with great fanfare today will have been consumed 1,000 times over by something equally stupid, relatively speaking, but far more intelligent than what was there. Life goes on. What's interesting is that the pinball cannot dominate the bowling ball with mass, with superior firepower. Just can't. However stupid the government, a lone individual cannot topple it and replace it. The individual could be 100 times more intelligent than the current power structure. It's just subject to the law of mass, which means that it takes a voluntary humility by the majority to bow to its minorities, to bow to the genius in a distinct minority, distinct from the Luddites, which are the other minority. It takes an act of humility to bow to a distinct minority and voluntarily give up control, facing the fear of death, facing the fear of the unknown, transcending the status quo with genius. Thank you for watching.